The tomb was sealed, stone walls heavy with incense, shadows dancing from flickering lamps. At the center, a queen lay draped in gold and linen, her crown askew, her lips stilled. Cleopatra, last pharaoh of Egypt, last descendant of Alexander's house, was dead. Outside, the city of Alexandria trembled. The clash of legions had ended, the roar of the sea had gone quiet, and now Rome's eagle banners rose above the harbor. The dynasty of the Ptolemies, rulers for 3 centuries, was finished. For nearly 3,000 years, Egypt had known kings who were gods, pharaohs who raised pyramids that touched the sky, carved temples into stone, and commanded the Nile like a living artery. Now that story was over. The queen who had fought Rome with wit, love, and steel had chosen death over chains. And with her, Egypt fell. Rome had not merely won a war. Rome had conquered eternity itself. Act 1. The Glory of Egypt. Before Rome's eagles shadowed the Nile, Egypt was already ancient. Its civilization stretched back further than Rome could even imagine. When Roman children whispered myths of wolves and founders, Egypt had already built pyramids older than memory. The Nile was Egypt's lifeblood. Each year, its floods brought black soil that fed millions. Cities bloomed along its banks. Temples rose like mountains of stone, and priests etched the names of gods into eternity. To live in Egypt was to live under the gaze of timelessness. But time does not stand still. From pharaohs to Macedonians. In the 4th century BCE, Egypt was old, rich, powerful, but weary. Then came Alexander the Great. In 332 BCE, the Macedonian king swept through the land. The Persians who ruled Egypt fled. The Egyptians, long weary of foreign overlords, hailed Alexander not as conqueror, but as liberator. In Memphis, he was crowned pharaoh. In the desert, he traveled to the oracle of Ammon, where priests called him son of a god. And on the Mediterranean coast, Alexander founded a city, Alexandria, a city that would become Egypt's beating heart. But Alexander did not live to see it flourish. He died young, and his generals carved his empire into pieces. Egypt fell to Ptolemy, one of Alexander's companions. He took the crown, became pharaoh, and founded a dynasty that would rule for nearly 3 centuries. Alexandria, jewel of the Mediterranean. Under the Ptolemies, Egypt transformed. Alexandria became the wealthiest city of its age. Her great lighthouse, the Pharos, towered over the sea, one of the 7 wonders of the world. Her library, legendary, gathered scrolls from across the known earth. Knowledge itself lived in Egypt. Her markets bustled with traders, Greek, Egyptian, Jewish, Phoenician, Nubian. Gold and grain, glass and papyrus flowed through her harbors.
But the dynasty was not purely Egyptian. The Ptolemies ruled as foreign kings. Macedonians who wore the double crown, spoke Greek in their palaces, and schemed like serpents against their own blood. Brother killed brother. Sisters poisoned sisters. Incest bound the royal family together and tore it apart. And yet, despite the corruption, Egypt endured. It remained wealthy, alluring, powerful, enough to draw the gaze of Rome. Rome's hunger. By the 2nd century BCE, Rome had already devoured Carthage and Macedon. It had marched east, west, and north, turning rivals into provinces. The Senate looked at Egypt with both fascination and hunger. Egypt was the granary of the Mediterranean. Its fertile Nile delta could feed entire armies. To control Egypt was to control the bread of the world. But Rome was cautious. Egypt was ruled by kings who were allies, sometimes useful, sometimes not. Better to wait, to let the dynasty rot from within, until the moment came to strike. And the stage for Cleopatra. By the 1st century BCE, the Ptolemaic dynasty was crumbling. Intrigue, civil wars, and corruption hollowed it out. Egypt was rich but weak, its crown worn by children, its throne fought over by siblings, its fate bound to Rome's whims. And into this chaos stepped Cleopatra VII. She was no ordinary queen. Educated in philosophy, fluent in many languages, she was as much a diplomat as a monarch. Unlike her ancestors, she spoke Egyptian to her people. She understood that survival meant more than crowns. It meant bending history itself. But history was already moving against her. Rome was rising. The Republic was tearing itself apart in civil war, but its legions, its generals, its hunger for empire, all were unstoppable. Cleopatra would have to fight not just as a queen, but as the last pharaoh. Act 2. Rome meets the Nile. By the mid-1st century BCE, Egypt was rich in gold, grain, and legend, but weak in power. The Ptolemaic dynasty, once heirs of Alexander, had decayed into a family of poison and daggers. Siblings murdered siblings for the throne. Pharaohs were children propped up by regents. The people suffered under taxes, while Alexandria's palaces glittered with imported marble. And into this chaos stepped Cleopatra VII. She was just 18 when she claimed the throne beside her younger brother, Ptolemy XIII. According to tradition, they were not just siblings, but husband and wife, as the Ptolemies had long practiced. But Cleopatra was no passive consort. She intended to rule. Ptolemy's advisors, threatened by her ambition, forced her into exile. She fled into the desert, raising an army to reclaim her crown. And it was in this moment of crisis that Rome arrived. Julius Caesar in Egypt. The year was 48 BCE. Julius Caesar, Rome's most brilliant general, had just crushed his rival Pompey in civil war. Pompey fled across the sea and sought refuge in Egypt. But Egypt was no safe haven. Ptolemy's advisors, hoping to please Caesar, murdered Pompey upon arrival. They presented his severed head as a gift to the Roman general. Caesar was not pleased. He had wanted Pompey alive, a trophy, not a corpse. Instead, he saw cowardice, betrayal, and weakness. And so Caesar lingered in Alexandria, judging Egypt's rulers. It was then Cleopatra made her move, the queen and the general. Legend says Cleopatra had herself smuggled into Caesar's presence, rolled inside a carpet or sack of linen. When unwrapped, she emerged before him, radiant, confident, defiant. Caesar was 52, Cleopatra 21. But age mattered little. She was brilliant, witty, and utterly determined. To her, Caesar was salvation, Rome's most powerful man. To him, she was captivating, a queen with fire in her eyes and a kingdom in her grasp. Together, they reshaped Egypt's throne. Caesar declared Cleopatra rightful ruler. Ptolemy XIII resisted, but Caesar's legions crushed him in the Alexandrian War. Ptolemy drowned in the Nile, and Cleopatra stood triumphant. Cleopatra and Caesarion. From this union came a child, Ptolemy XV, known as Caesarion, Little Caesar. Cleopatra hailed him as her heir, blending the bloodlines of Egypt and Rome. But Caesar never recognized the boy as legitimate. In Rome, his enemies whispered that Cleopatra was a seductress, that she had ensnared him with luxury and witchcraft. Still, for a brief time, Egypt flourished. Cleopatra ruled beside Caesar, strengthening her hold, restoring order, and dreaming of a dynasty that might outlive Rome's storms. But Rome's storms were only growing. The Ides of March. In 44 BCE, Caesar was murdered by senators who feared his power. Cleopatra, in Rome with her child, fled home at once. Without Caesar's protection, she stood alone. But history gave her a second chance in the form of another Roman general.
Act 3. Love and War. Julius Caesar's death split Rome into chaos. The Republic crumbled into civil war once more. On one side stood Octavian, Caesar's adopted heir, cold, young, calculating. On the other, Mark Antony, Caesar's loyal friend and brilliant commander, fiery, reckless, and charismatic. Cleopatra watched from Alexandria. She knew Rome would decide her kingdom's fate. And so when Antony summoned her to answer for Egypt's loyalties, she sailed to meet him. Antony and Cleopatra. Her arrival was legend. Cleopatra's barge glittered with gold, its sails purple, its oars silver. She herself was dressed as Isis, goddess of Egypt, seated beneath a canopy of jewels. Perfume drifted over the water, and music echoed from the decks. Antony was entranced. Cleopatra was no supplicant queen, she was a living deity. Their meeting sparked not only an alliance, but a love affair that shook the world.
Act 4. The Death of a Queen. The palace at Alexandria was silent. Outside its walls, Rome's legions marched. Octavian, heir of Caesar, master of propaganda, future Augustus, had conquered the Nile. Cleopatra, last Pharaoh, weighed her choices. She knew what awaited her in Rome. Octavian would drag her through the streets in chains, a foreign trophy for his triumph. She would not die a queen, but live as a spectacle. For a woman who had lived as Isis reborn, there could be no greater humiliation. And so she chose death. The final hours. On the 12th of August, 30 BCE, Cleopatra shut herself in her tomb with 2 loyal servants. She dressed in royal robes, placed the diadem on her head, and surrounded herself with treasures. She sent word to Octavian that she wished to be buried with Antony. Then came the end. Ancient accounts differ. Some say she pressed a venomous asp to her breast, its bite swift and silent. Others claim she pricked herself with a poisoned comb or ointment. However it came, her death was deliberate, defiant. When Octavian's soldiers broke in, they found her lifeless, her servants dying beside her. The last pharaoh of Egypt lay still, her crown fallen, her kingdom surrendered, not in battle, but in silence. Octavian's triumph. With Cleopatra dead, Octavian claimed Egypt as his own. Antony's body was buried at her side, but his memory was cursed in Rome. Caesarion, Cleopatra's son with Julius Caesar, was hunted down and killed. 2 Caesars are too many, Octavian is said to have remarked. The dynasty of the Ptolemies was gone. 3 centuries of rule ended in a single act of venom and steel. Octavian returned to Rome not merely as victor, but as the man who had ended an age. He became Augustus, the first emperor, and Egypt, once the kingdom of gods and pharaohs, became a province, Rome's jewel. Act 5. It ended a civilization that had endured longer than memory. It ended gods made flesh. It ended pharaohs. The eagle of Rome flew higher, but the Nile flowed on, carrying with it the whispers of kings and queens who once ruled as eternal. And perhaps one day, Rome too would learn what Egypt had already taught, that even the mightiest empires turn to dust.